Hey everyone, just Tim here. This is a little bit outside the norm, but we're here with a special episode. As all of you probably know, and for those of you who don't, I'm going to break some news for you. MLS is back. This Saturday is the Fire's first game in Columbus, and we're going to have wall-to-wall coverage of that on MIR97.com with multiple articles every day to get you ready for everything you need to know about the changes, the team, where everything stands, so as well as potentially some breaking news ahead of the season. So be sure to check that out. And for those of you looking for our season preview on the bonfire, this is not that. We will still be doing that later on this week with the normal panel as well as a special guest. So be sure to keep an eye out for that. Before that, though, I sat down with David Goss from Soccerwise to preview the Fire's 2025 season, and we wanted to share that with you. So many of you, maybe most of you, are familiar with that name. For those that are not, David Goss was on Extra Time for a decade before moving over to Soccerwise. We also hear from Matt Doyle, also formerly of Extra Time, currently writing on MLSsoccer.com, as well as he started a Substack recently, who gives his insights on the Fire, and we get an over-underline on the Fire from Andrew Wiebe, a name that, again, old Extra Time listeners are well familiar with. I think a lot of us are still processing the loss of that podcast in different ways, but its spirit really does live on in Soccerwise. They've got MLS coverage with David Goss and Tom Bogert, NWSL coverage from David Goss and Jordan Angeli, who is just one of the most insightful people in the game. They have podcasts available wherever you get your pods, as well as they do 3 live shows a week on YouTube and I believe Twitch. I am a subscriber. I love everything they do, so I encourage you to check them out if you don't already. So this is the same interview that will form the bulk of their season preview of the Fire, but they also have a lengthy discussion about the team on their recent Over-Under episode that's available on their feed. And I think that when this is posted, they will have another intro, like to kind of intro this podcast, like what I'm doing now, from Goss and I believe potentially Tom Bogert as well. So it's worth checking out there for that, if nothing else. And if you've been following Soccerwise's coverage or reading what Doyle's put out on MLS Soccer or his Substack, you get the feeling that there really is a widespread belief that the Fire have finally turned the page and that this could be the start of something very good for the team after so long when there hasn't been nearly enough of that. So I think that comes through in our conversation. I hope that it does. And wanted to share this with you. And without further ado, here is my conversation with David Goss from Soccerwise.
Fire, 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 fire. Hopefully, we will be singing once again this year. It is time now to talk about the Chicago Fire. To do so, we've got one of our favorites, Tim Hotze here, a legend in our Discord, as well as MIR97, the website. You can listen to their podcast as well. Tim, we've done a couple Zooms together, but now it's our first official show together, so I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
For anyone who doesn't already, you can subscribe to our Patreon. It gets you access to our Discord. There is heavy kit conversation going on right now. Upon the release, it was a great spot to talk about all of our over-unders for the season as well on our points totals. And you also helped guide me. I would like you to know that I got my tire patched and it is back in my garage and it all worked out. And it was $300 cheaper than buying a new tire. So it worked out pretty well for me.
100% worth it. I was kind of worried when I didn't hear from you for a bit. I'm like, did I just kill David Goss? Because that would be bad. I've patched tires before and I've always been fine, but I'm like, oh man, is this the one time that anything bad has happened like this?
No, I didn't do it myself. I had someone professional do it because I know my city slicker limitations and I didn't want to go too far. Let's dig into the Chicago Fire here. It is a fascinating offseason. They were one of our big conversations on our over-under points show that we did with Matt Doyle and Tommy Scoops. They are going to be, I think, center to what a lot of people are watching early on in the season. A ton of transfer news, as well as, of course, a new coach taking over. We should probably start there because it's so big. Gregg Berhlater takes over as not just the head coach, but the sporting director of this club. He's a big name. It's a massive move. I know you've been around Chicago for a while, and Gregg, of course, living there, working for U.S. Soccer. What did you make of it when it finally happened, and what does it look like so far?
Yeah, I thought it was nearly an ideal hire because obviously the team has been through this like hope and dashed hope cycle for so many years. They needed someone to come in and that could help establish the culture of the club. And that's one of the things that everyone says that Berhalter did with U.S. men's national team. He kind of fixed a culture that had broken. And so the alternative would have been like hiring someone to come in as like a CSO type, and then they hire a coach, and then it's already the preseason. Like we've seen that before. And it really wouldn't have, I just don't think that there was a better hire than him. And since then, like I've been to training a couple times this preseason, and it is an entirely different tempo around just like what the expectations are, the way that the players are acting. And I think we've started to see some of that from the team's preseason games. Sometimes in results, but I mean, it's preseason, so who cares? But just in the way that guys are moving, the way that guys are carrying themselves.
I agree with you of like the hire made so much sense. There's two sides to this that I think Gregg Berhalter hits both, which is raise the floor in MLS, but also raise the ceiling because Joe Mansueto wants to spend, and Chicago's a massive market of what an MLS team could be. Atlanta's pushing those lines. Inter Miami's pushing those lines. LAFC has. Chicago should be one of those teams, but you can't get there until you do the first part. So to have someone in Gregg Berhalter who could, in theory, do both, his international experience, his national team resume, and all of that, but also understand on the bottom side of like what Jack Elliott brings to a team in MLS and, what you can get at the defensive midfield position and the little steps you need to take is huge. One of the questions, though, is then what does his workflow look like as both CSO and head coach? He has made a number of hires around that. What do you make of the staff he's put together?
Yeah, I think it's been a pretty impressive staff. I mean, like that was the big question is he going to be able to delegate? And we still don't fully know that because he's never had to, like, he is yet to sort of like get back into coaching games that matter in MLS and, doing the other stuff and like doing all the CSO part of the job.
Yeah.
But it's a larger front office than it was before. Bringing in Gregg Berhlater, who, first time in MLS, I would sort of argue he's already kind of been doing some work in MLS, keeping a name that we all wanted to see in Duncan McGuire in the league. So, this is just the payback for that. But yeah, it's him. It's Mikey Stevens is in as well as, there's some people returning. It's a larger front office. And so there's people there that will help around. And, as long as he's willing to delegate, which it seems like he is, then I think that helps some of that. And he's also kind of bulked up the coaching staff around him. So, having help with both sides, I think, has been, what you wanted to see for it to work out.
I was fortunate enough to be on a call about youth development with Gregg Berhlater because he was at Bodo Glimt, where they are like an outlier in what they've been able to do, the success they've had. So you've got the soccer ideas there. You've got Mikey Stevens, who has a ton of MLS experience, being at pretty high levels with the LA Galaxy, and then, of course, U.S. soccer background. That all makes a ton of sense, and I think the coaching side is the side that's easiest for Gregg. I'm not saying it's easy, but like that's the most familiar part. And so it feels like the setup's pretty strong. And they came in, and I like a lot of what's happened so far. Let's run through our transfers. We will hit our Doyleisms where the great sage himself speaks. I think this was a walk and talk one. So maybe a little bit of sounds of New York City in the background. And then Andrew Wiebe went full Wiebe and hit me with like 37 texts. So we got 2 over-underlines that we're going to use from him. And on the transfers, it's been exciting, both in and out, I think, for Chicago Fire fans. Some names that maybe they've liked to have been out earlier are finally out the door, and then some big names coming in. Let's start with the incoming. Jonathan Bamba signed as a designated player from Celta Vigo is the huge one. Jack Elliott signed as a free agent. Philip Zinkernagel and Romelu Kwame brought in as TAM midfielders. Sam Rogers, a former U.S. call-up. I think he's got 1 cap and a U.S. national team player over in Europe, brought in. And then some really good homegrowns, some record homegrowns, as well as some local pieces in Dean Bolts and Omari Glasgow, who was with the 2 teams. So a ton of work done on this side of things. The one name I did not say in all of that is Neymar. We'll do that in just a moment. What do you make of the work they have done and the pieces they have brought in?
I mean, it's when you look at the who the starting 11, you'd expect to be, assuming everyone's healthy on day one. I mean, it's a significant turnover from what we saw last year, and the pieces that are still around are, I think, the ones that you wanted to see. Like, Kuipers didn't light the league on fire, but he got double digits in goals, which is something the Fire have not done for a number of years. And, every single game that I watched with, my notes on Kuipers were not, he's not finishing chances, right? It was like, he's doing impressive hold-up play and he's making a good run, and then nothing happens, right? So, we've talked about, the coaching being kind of easier for Berhalter. One thing he's always done is make strikers look good, and he's never, I think it's fair to say, had a striker at the club level at least that has the ceiling that Kuipers has. So that's going to be great. And then, half the roster turning over, bringing in a big free agent in Jack Elliott, second year in a row. That's happened after bringing in Kellen Acosta last year. And then, Acosta had an off year last year. I think you're hoping he rebounds. Brian Gutierrez did not have the breakout season that I think people had hoped that he would. But, he does look more energized, more engaged, and maybe ready to do that this year. And so it could be a very different feeling roster, even more than the fact that half of it's actually turned over. It could, I think that what you're hoping for is improvement from the group that is holding over as well.
Yeah, I think the idea of internal improvement because of better structure and clearer ideas that fit some specific skill sets as well is really, really promising. Jonathan Bamba is interesting. He fits the profile of where we are seeing a lot of MLS teams move, of the into the top 5 leagues, borderline starters that are not stars, sort of maybe some players that have missed on a move and are looking for an opportunity but have a ton of potential. It feels like he fits all that profile. What's sort of the idea around the scouting process here, him choosing to come, and the expectations in year one?
Yeah, I think he's an interesting hire. I think there was some kind of grumbling in the Fire fan base that has gotten used to the team spending a lot of money on transfers when it's just a $3 million transfer. That's nothing. How is this guy even a DP? I think that he was ready to leave Celta in Spain, and he won he won Ligue 1 with Lille that one year that was really fun to watch. And I think that what Berhalter and his staff are expecting is for him to get closer to that form of being a guy that can be both a dynamic playmaker as well as finish a number of goals, and I think that that's going to be crucial, because one thing that hasn't happened, that, as much as the roster's turned over, it still feels like there's not a lot of depth in some key places, including at striker. So there's going to have to be an offensive plan for what happens when Kuipers is not on the field, whether that's late in games because he's, went 90 minutes the week before, or whether that's because he's out for spending time out with an injury or something.
Yeah. I would say with that Lille team you watched, and I was watching a lot for Jonathan David, I thought Bamba was a game breaker consistently at the league on level. And so I have a lot of hope for this move. I don't know that it's enough. I wouldn't say he's Cucho. I wouldn't say he's Lucho, or maybe even Evander. And so is it enough as an MVP candidate to carry a team? I'm not sure. But I like the idea of making these first few moves and leaving the door open to see what else do you need? What do you want to lean into as you go forward? And they've cleared out a ton of space, as we said. Soke bought out, Fede Navarro and Tobias Salquest transferred out, Koutsias on loan to Mansueto's other club, Lugano, and then finishing off the contracts of Rafael Schijos, Fabian Herbers, Lassiter, Ritchie, and Wyatt Omsberg. It is a lot of names out the door. I think you put in the Discord when, what was it, Fede Navarro finally got, Gaston Jimenez.
Gaston Jimenez, yeah, didn't mention him, yeah. He's the other one. And that was just, it was I think it was Christmas Eve when the deal was announced. Right. And because it just seemed like Heights had a compulsion for giving the guy new contracts. He had 3 separate deals in MLS, 2 of which, the second one kept him as a DP. And you're just how wasn't this a deal that was tammable? That would have been a logical move at the time, but that took until a 3rd deal. And then he's under contract basically until he's eligible to collect Social Security. It's, but yeah, he, I think that he was emblematic of what the problems that with the roster construction under Heights. So moving on from him, I was surprised. I thought that was going to be a buyout because there was no one that was going to take his, no offer would come through that he'd look at the wages and say, okay, I'll take that. So that was impressive. And just the agility that the front office has shown in making those kinds of moves, I think is not something that the Fire have had in the past few years. Like Heights did that his first offseason ahead of the COVID year, but since then it was almost like a glacial pace with turning over the roster, like a lot of moves in 2022, but didn't make a difference in the end with where the team landed in the standings.
Let's go to our Doyleism now. Reminder before we get there, because of all of the craziness with cups, I remind for every team what they will play in for the Chicago Fire. It is just the U.S. Open Cup, as they didn't qualify for the playoffs last year, so no Leagues Cup and no CONCACAF Champions Cup. Open Cup, of course, a competition that has been very friendly to the Chicago Fire, but that's a bit in the past now. So let's go to our Doyleism, and then we'll jump off the back of that.
I'm buying the Chicago Fire as one of the most improved teams in MLS this year. We've seen them make big moves in the winter. They added at least 5 starters, maybe 6, depending on if Sam Rogers gets into the starting lineup at center back alongside Jack Elliott. And that's one of the best free agent signings of the offseason. Maybe the very best, actually. Like, Elliott's been awesome. And the thing is, he'll fit exactly what Gregg Berhalter wants to do, right? Gregg Berhalter always wants to fix the structure and defense, whether it's club or country. He relies upon his center backs in the build-out. He wants to make sure that those guys are sort of dictating the game, and Elliott does that really well. He didn't get to show it all the time just because of Philly's game model, but I think he will under Berhalter in Chicago. So that fixes like 70% of what was wrong or what's been wrong with the Fire for most of the past 15 years. And obviously, then once you have that sort of foundation, it makes it easier to build a functional and hopefully high-performing attack. And if you think about Berhalter's best crew teams, it was center forwards like Kai Kamara, Ola Kamara, Jossie Zardes having the best seasons of their careers. And I think Hugo Kuipers is that type of center forward as well. So just looking at it, it all makes sense in a way that the Chicago Fire have rarely made sense since about 2009 or so, the glory days of Kalen Carr.
We love Kalen Carr, so we love the reference there back to the Dennis Hamlett years. And of course, for some, it has felt even longer since success. Overall, what do you make of Doyle's thoughts of what Gregg's going to bring and sort of what this team looks like?
Yeah, I think that he's got it completely right. I mean, you know, the team hasn't really had a coherent structure that's lasted for very long, you know, more than a season. Last year, I think one of the things that Brian Gutierrez kind of was held back with was that it went from like he's on the wing to like he's starting in the midfield to like it just felt for a while like he was kind of wandering around somewhere between the wing and like the number 10 spot and like didn't really have a job. He's just kind of like out on the pitch. And that's not a good way to develop a player. It's also not a good way to, you know, give a guy confidence that I think that he needed when it felt like Shaqiri was always going to be above him in the pecking order, regardless of what happened on the pitch. So the structure, I think, is going to be huge. And it really could be the first time in, I mean, I don't even know how long that the team has had a coherent identity with how they want to play that sort of like lasts multiple games. Because like even going back to the Pano era, it felt like there was just like a rotating cast of like, okay, who's going to start at right back this time? Like I'm pretty sure that like any name that you could think of from those squads like ended up playing there for at least a game. It like, you know, and so I think that just having a structure is going to be huge. And I think that the hope has to be for the Fire that they are one of the most improved teams because they finished 15th in the East, like one spot above the Wooden Spoon. And so they can really only go up, but I think that they hope that it's substantially up. And they've been making the right moves, I think, to do that.
Doyle's thoughts on Jack Elliott, I think, are interesting in that there's clear expectations that he raises the floor defensively. He has been really, really good as a tackle, you know, as a ball winner, as a tackler. He's shown his athleticism as well to cover over the top. We haven't seen much of him as a passer just because of the way Philly's chosen to play. And so I think that's what we're still waiting to see was there more space for him to grow into? Or if he is what he is at 29 years old, which I think is still an improvement for Chicago. And then Doyle mentioned Sam Rogers in there. We're not 100% sure who his partner is. Who do you think? Is it Carlos Tehran's spot to lose for now?
I had initially thought that it was going to be Tehran's spot to lose. Just seeing just seeing how Rodgers has been looking in training, it wouldn't surprise me if he was the starter by the beginning, which then begs the question of like, what happens to Carlos Terán? Yeah. Like the team had been working for a move for him in a couple different windows, but he always got injured at exactly the wrong time. And now you wonder, like, is that holding him back? Because no one wants a big, physical center back that can't play because he's hurt all the time. But I think that Rodgers could really be, have pushed his way into being the starting conversation. And, I've seen Jack Elliott, just like in training and stuff like that, do things with his feet that I haven't seen center backs in the Fire do in a very long time. So I think the hope is that he can grow into that if he hasn't done it already. Like, I think he did play in a defensive midfield position in like emergency situations a couple times here and there for Philly. So like, you don't do that if you think the center back is just like a big, tall guy that's going to like, stop balls in the air and stuff.
Unless you're a soccer team that just wants to see if everyone can run into the opponent as fast as humanly possible at the highest speed ever generated. But I would agree with you there. I think there's a lot of these pieces I'm excited about in this team. One is Andrew Gutman. We have seen Gregg Berhalter really employ attacking fullbacks in a way in which they're able to put up big numbers and affect the game at a really high level. And if Bamba's going to come inside a bit, there should be some space there. With injuries, we just haven't seen the best of him for a very long time. So that, I think, is a little bit exciting. And there's a lot to be excited about around this Chicago team. So you talked about improvement. Let's get into it. Let's get into our over-under lines with Andrew Wiebe. He starts with Brian Gutierrez, 16.5 goals plus assists this season. He asks, basically, does he make a leap? He's been sitting around 10 for a couple of years now. I actually posed a similar question on our over-under show. I think the number I put was around what Diego Luna has done. So I think Luna was the American assist leader last year. I think it was 14 assists. And then the question becomes, as goals and assists combined, where do you think he falls? So what do you think of this line and where do you fall?
So he had 9 last year, 6 goals and 3 assists, but he normally was a guy that would get assists and not others. So I think the Fire hope that that's what he can do. I mean, the Luna comparison, I think, is interesting because they're almost exactly the same age. Guti, I think, was a name that not just in Chicago, but like elsewhere, like the youth national team picture, that was expected to basically be doing what Luna is now. Mm-hmm. And I think that the Fire had hoped that he would be the sort of like engine of the team in a way that Luna's being asked. I think he can do it. I mean, he's looked good in preseason. I don't think people realize how high his ceiling is because you only see it in like isolated moments. Yeah. And a lot of the time he's hung a lot closer to his floor than his ceiling. I've been seeing him doing stuff more consistently in preseason. He looks bigger. He looks stronger. I mean, he's, still of that age, like he's turning 21 this year, like where he, is bulking up physically because some guys at that age have done it and some just have not. And he does look bigger and stronger. And it could really be breakout year seems weird for a guy that has, gotten 2,400 minutes last year, but it feels like it could be the year that Brian Gutierrez goes from, oh yeah, that's a name that I've heard in MLS to like, that's a guy, the way that people are talking about Luna.
Yeah. I think if he's online for these numbers and I have him over, I'm super confident in what he can do. I like the way you put it of like, you have seen the flashes and yet he's still probably been at his floor, which means if he hits his ceiling, he can be really, really special. I did Scuffed and they asked about players to watch in MLS and he was one of the first that I named when you talk about young Americans. I thought he looked the part in January and like January camp is not everything, but to physically look like you belong on that field and look as good as Jack McGlynn and Ben-Ha Kremasky and all these other pieces, I think is promising. And it is a position on top of the number 9 that I think Gregg Berhalter does a really good job helping make their life easier. I think with Bamba and Zinkernagel, the game's going to get pulled wide. I think Gutierrez is going to have a ton of gaps and openings to either be 1v1 or to be able to burst through without being stopped defensively and get into transition moments, be dangerous. I think the structure for him is going to be really, really exciting for the first time for him to operate in. My biggest concern about this number is if he's on track for it, if he plays a full season in Major League Soccer. I think he's that good that if he starts the year the way we think, teams are going to come in with offers. And if teams come in with offers, I don't know that Chicago can say no, especially with the DP spot open. Do you look at it and say, all right, let's do the business now. Let's go get our number 10 at 27 years old who will be here and we'll make the money off Gutierrez. And of course, all the money that's already come in on Duran and everything else going on over the last few weeks. Let's finish on this one team-wide. Andrew Ruby gives us 43.5 points. That is the over-under that he sets. I guess I should probably have had Matt Doyle's over-under, which we just did. I don't know why Weeby felt he should do the same thing. And that was 43.5 points. So he's just asking us the same question. Twice again, I guess that allows you to answer. I already answered on the show. I said over. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's going to be over. I think the comparison that you're hoping for is like FC Cincinnati, after Chris Albright and Pat Noonan came in, 80% of that roster stayed on the next year with the Fire. We said 5 or 6 new starters. So it's going to be closer to 50% of the minutes or 60% of the minutes are returning. And they improved 29 points. The Fire had 30. That would put them well over. I don't think they're going to get close to 60 points, but I think that they could be upper 40s. I think, and be pushing for not just a play-in spot, but one of the lower seeds in the playoffs proper, 7th, or around that area.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. Let me finish you on a massive question. How big of an impact can it have in Chicago? Playing at Soldier Field, I know the Bears are all over the place right now. Joe Mansueto wants to invest. The Neymar rumors, whether they were real or fake, are exciting. At the end of this year, how much can it matter? How big can Chicago Fire get? Or what do they need to do to sort of reestablish themselves?
The thing I've been saying is everyone's no one cares about the team and market and stuff. And there's some truth to that. And that is will winning fix it? And I've kind of said, let's just try a couple seasons of winning first and see what that gets you. And then we can try troubleshooting other problems, right? I think it can be huge. I mean, Chicago loves a winner. The Blackhawks were drawing 12,000 people, 11,000 people officially announced, attendance. And that was very optimistic. They got good. They won a Stanley Cup, and then they've been, consistently selling out for a decade, even after the team's form has dropped off. The Fire needs to reintroduce themselves in relevance to the market, and winning is the way to do it. And, they're doing it with a bunch of homegrowns. I think that there's 7 in the roster. There's a number of other guys like Andrew Gutman, Chris Mueller that are from the Chicago area that are also in the roster. So it's a hometown team that I think Chicago is just ready to get behind if that's marketed. But the way to do that is by playing exciting soccer and winning games.
The Chicago Fire were relevant when they were good, and that was before Major League Soccer was relevant, which is the part that's really, really hard about all of this. I'm hopeful. I think the Neymar stuff, as fun as it was and as wild as it was, I think it sort of, though, puts them in a conversation where I think people that are looking to make moves will think about them. Agents will reach out. There'll be conversations. Whether it's the right or wrong move for the club, I'm not sure. And I don't think they need to make a signing for a name. I like your theory, which is try being a good professional sports team first. And if that doesn't work, then you can try and become the gimmick or add to that or all of that on top of that. So I'm excited for the season. I cannot wait to see it all get started. I can see from Gregg, and I'm sure you see it when you talk to him, he's excited to coach again. And we're all waiting to see what it looks like. There are a lot of people on the internet who have their fingers above the keyboard, ready to type and throw their commentary in, whichever way it goes. And of course, we're going to cover it here on Soccerwise. So if you're listening for the first time, we're covering MLS and NWSL every day of the week, live 3 times a week, podcast 4 to 5 times a week. And if you are listening to Soccerwise, as you always do, and you want to follow Chicago Fire, go to Men in Red. It's the best place to do it. As you said, Tim, it is a very Chicago-heavy club, and you guys have a finger on the pulse of that better than anyone. And hopefully there's some fun stories for you to talk about this year as well.
Yeah, fingers crossed.